Hi, Bhanuj. I think
Hi.
we are meeting for the first time on the podcast, and quite a new space for me to dwell in. And I want to thank you for coming to this podcast. And I want to introduce everybody that Bhanuj has been in the music journalism area with respect to the entertainment industry, and we would like to get insights from him with respect to certain questions related to the music industry and the independent music, how the DIY culture, high budget gigs, and the documentation part of the music culture is how it functions and everything around it.
Yeah,
So, Banuj, welcome to the podcast. And this has been a great ride. And finally, we are here. If you please kindly introduce yourself, we can move ahead.
yeah, of course. Thank you, Niranjan. I'm Bhanuj Kappal. As you said, a music journalist. And I also cover other sort of subaltern art and cultural scenes and like counterculture and subculture and stuff like that. And I started writing this when I was in college and stuff, like writing about rock music in Bombay and in India in 2006 when I started writing for this small magazine called Rock Street Journal. And since then, it's been quite a journey. So now it's almost 20 years now of covering different aspects of independent music and art all over like India and the subcontinent. And it's been quite a ride.
Right, right. So that gives me an idea that I am going to ask you certain questions which go deeper, and we are trying to, start a conversation here about these aspects. Number
Yeah.
one is the Indian music industry truly independent? Do you think we need more artist management agencies or independent labels that go beyond bookings, or perhaps even offering long-term incentives like health insurance for artists? Because in
Yeah.
recent events, we have had one or two statements where publicly the demand for health insurance and the experiences were shared. So, what is your take?
So I mean, like there's a few parts to that question. The first is like what is our definition of independent? Because
Right.
uh, if you're looking at say indie music and independent music in the Western context, is where this comes from. It was largely independent from the major labels and the mainstream music industry. The idea was like a lot of this developed either because there were types of sounds, types of scenes that the mainstream music industry wouldn't touch or would not give attention to, either because of the type of music or because, like, especially earlier in the day, early in the 20th century, you're also talking about the race of the people making it. So a lot of black music did not get nearly as much coverage or attention as white artists, either doing their own stuff or making similar music. And then over the 60s, 70s, you see uh, more ideological differences leading to independent labels, independent venues, and basically building an entire infrastructure that is less devoted to capitalist, consumerist sort of ways of thinking about culture and how we should organize, as well as an emphasis on fairer deals for artists and a more collaborative sort of uh, way of thinking about how the music business should work. So in that sense, you can't really say the music industry is independent because independent music and the independent scene is essentially about talking about being independent from and different from, and at least in their own terms, better than the mainstream music industry. And so in India, I think like there is a weird sort of this dichotomy works differently in India because in India we have come to a point where anything that is considered that is non-Bollywood becomes considered independent music, even if
Right.
you're releasing it on a Sony Music or a Universal, and so that like that same idea of independent doesn't
Yeah,
really
in
work
fact,
out.
that's a great point. Yeah, yeah. In fact, that's a great point. Yes.
And this is a confusion that the major labels love to uh, push also. You would see them
Mm.
keep saying using the words indie or independent for their artists, which have like a massive multi-billion dollar global conglomerate behind them, still trying to
Mm.
pose as indie music just because it's not film music. So in India, like the sort of more ideological independent scene is fairly small. The sort of people
Yeah, correct.
who want to do things differently, who want to focus more on what they think is good music rather than music as a product, who want to focus on a safer music scene that is not like as because in India the major labels and the mainstream music industry is even more risk averse than you in the US or the UK, both in
Mm.
terms of like the type of creative risk that artists are allowed to take and the
Mm.
type of political or like rhetoric, either politically or ideologically or even socially, that those artists are allowed to say is much smaller because partly because we're not a country of rule of law. We're a country that where a lot of it is ruled by law. So
Right.
if you upset the powers that be, and even if you're a multi-million dollar company, they will file cases against you. You might have a mob turn up outside your office, and sure you can win it in court. And then you are a lawyer, so you know all of this. You can win it in court 6 to 10 years down the line, but that doesn't
Yeah.
help if your business is stuck, or if your employees get assaulted, or if your profits
Correct.
you can't make your profits.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that scene is fairly small. It's also muddied by a lot of people, not just the major labels, a lot of people who are independent only in the sense that they're trying to be independent till they got bought out by a major label or get a deal with a major
Right.
label. And
That's
so
the
they're
step
like,
one. Yeah,
yeah,
there are
so
steps
they
to it, right?
so those are like there's a lot of people who are like what I back in the
Mm.
day used to call like cottage capitalism, which is they still
Mm.
they have the aesthetics of an independent, rebellious, anti-capitalist mode of music industry. But under that, they're really just trying to be a small version of the same thing, which is why they're so beholden to sponsors. Like the whole economic model is built on brand sponsorships.
Right.
And like, which is why we have so many festivals. Everyone wants to make a festival because you can get a brand in, you can make money, you can get scale.
Yeah.
So like what they're talking about, the way you
The
see a lot of these
family angle
artists,
is also brought in, family
yeah,
angle to the festival.
yeah.
So
So
it's
when
like,
a lot of people talk about these sort of things, they're really talking about the same language that say your tech bros are talking about, right? They're talking about scale, how to get numbers, how to hack the social media algorithms to get your get your music. I mean, it very much is the same sort of conversation that is happening in a Universal or a Sony uh, like executive meeting room. Uh,
acha.
the second part of your question is talking about, say, health insurance and uh, other sorts of like safety mechanism, protection mechanisms for artists.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Any
that, I
incentive?
mean, yeah,
Yes.
so that doesn't really exist, I think, anywhere
Right.
outside of, say, like where you have the state promoting certain types of sort of indigenous culture, where then you have a little bit of a support, and but that's also
Yeah.
less about the artist itself and more about ways to keep that sort of traditional art form alive. And a lot of it, so you'll have the state government taking Mangani musicians abroad, for example, and they'll provide some sort of support to artists, but that's a very limited thing, and it has a very specific purpose. The thing is that you need a union, you need some sort of collective organized action on behalf
Yeah.
of the artists.
But
And
in
so
the
you,
commercial industries, we already have
yes,
that. For example, MCCAI
yeah,
and other federal unions are there in the Bollywood commercial industry. However, the
yes,
independent industry does not have that,
it does.
collated demand coming up.
Yeah. So I think partly it's because a lot of independent musicians, anyway, are like people who tend to be like, I'm not going to, not always, but I'm not, if I wanted to follow the tried and tested, the safe path, right, then
Mm,
I would have
mm,
just gone Bollywood. So they're very individualistic. So it's very hard to get them. You see the same thing with, say, the stand-up comedy scene, where you have concerted
okay.
sort of legal and extra-legal attacks on comedians, but they
Right.
can't really organize a response together because just
No.
that everyone thinks of themselves as individual sort of businesses or brands. So the idea that we're
Mm,
all in this together and how to figure out how to work together, how to
correct.
and the other thing is we're all essentially freelancers. And this is something you
Yeah.
see even in journalism. So when you're freelancers,
Yeah.
it's much scarier to try and do this sort of collective action because first of all,
Yeah.
the way the
The
industry
idea
works,
is to go beyond rules. Yeah. Idea
yeah.
is to go beyond rules. Yeah.
And there's a certain insecurity because you don't have a job
Yeah,
and you
right.
don't have a union protecting you. So you think you speak
Mm,
up and then you get blacklisted and then like it's also the way these industries are
mm,
structured. It's the feeling that
yes.
they want you to have, which is you are
Mm,
alone against the company or against the editor or against the government or whatever, and so you don't think in the same way. You don't already have set up forums where you can come and share your experiences and your goals and your strategies for dealing with this
Yes.
sort of stuff. So collective
Yes.
action becomes very difficult. So as much
Yes.
as I would love for that sort of stuff to happen, it'll only happen if you can if we can organize together and put collective pressure on the labels that are profiting from it, or you
Hmm.
figure out ways to do it independently. Because it's also the like who do you put pressure on? You can put
Hmm.
pressure on the major
Hmm.
labels, but then that's a small chunk of the actual number of artists. Certain
Okay.
and the
Right.
chunk of the artists who are on the major labels are probably the ones that need the support the least because they are the ones with the most financial backing and the most financial and
Okay.
other sort of means of support that they're getting.
Correct.
Uh, the other part is doing independently. If you're an artist releasing your own music on Spotify, who do you go to? Who do you put pressure on to provide health insurance? So you have to
Yes.
figure out a way to have the union do it.
Right.
Like so. Essentially, the
Yeah.
problem with doing something like that
Yeah.
is
Right.
like you have to figure out
But there
collective.
are many people apart from collective. I'll just summarize how you have put this together.
Yeah,
What I could understand as there is largely an absence in all sorts of independent, non-organized areas, unorganized areas, and that absence is largely filled by the legal mechanism available to you.
yeah,
And one of that illegal mechanism is intellectual property.
yeah,
The second legal mechanism is labor laws and industrial laws. And the third mechanism is going to be the cultural aspect within
yeah,
the larger frame of things,
yeah,
within larger frame of things, meaning beyond just the commercial work into the community building and everything around us.
yeah,
And in these three ways, largely what I could understand from your answer is there have been attempts to get the space together. However, there is no collated demand coming up.
yeah,
And secondly, and even if these are the legitimate demands anybody could put forth, but these legitimate demands have to have the concerted some sort of a dialogue and common forum should be there or it's not there. We don't know
yeah.
if it will be there or not there, but today the common forum is not there, and therefore the even if the artist management agencies have the even if you go against them, it's a small chunk of artists which are with them,
Yeah.
and largely it remains a bigger chunk is still not with the artist management agencies and the labels, so there is no
So
point.
yeah, so there are smaller independent artist management
Mhm.
agencies
Mm.
where a bunch of
Yeah.
artists, but those are uh, also not
Right.
organizations with a lot of financial sort of backing
Yes.
and a lot of financial assets. So they cannot really
Mm.
provide health insurance and all.
Right.
Although
Right.
like those are things that they can explore ways to sort of
Mm.
subsidize.
Right.
Uh, but like they're also kind of working mostly on a consultancy basis. Neither is employee of the other. The other thing is our labor relations, our labor laws, and the way we think about them are still very much focused on the industrial sort of employer worker type of relationship. So like they're not very great for the sort of much more malleable, much more complicated relationships in the creative spaces. But like you were saying, so there are legal remedies, but A, there's a serious lack of awareness of them. B, there is a serious lack of trust in them. So people are not willing to take those risks, to stand up and to, to take on like a 10, 15-year-old legal battle, and also simultaneously very little capacity to sort of affect policy. So if you look at, you
Yeah.
mentioned
Also, it
intellectual
is
property
expensive.
rights.
Yeah.
It's
It is expensive.
expensive. They lack expertise. They lack the sort of guidance. So if you look at intellectual property, uh, I mean, Indian sort of songwriters getting royalties was a fight that started in like and has been going on for a while, but really started in earnest in say 2003, 4 when Javed Akhtar and IPRS and all of these guys got in there. And even now, it is not a settled matter. So it's now been almost 15, 20 years. And the bodies that have come up, like the IPRS and PPL, they're also still very much like the labels are themselves are majority stakeholders in those organizations. So there's no organization that is only for the artist, right? For the songwriter or for the musician. Those ones still have like labels on the board, label representatives in the decision making process. So, and those are the people who are largely you're talking about people who are working on Bollywood films or on the sort of big pop albums, which are working through the same mechanism but just not attached to a film. So then that's the top of the pyramid. So even if there you don't really have that sort of independent artist only, artist focused organizations, then once you go further down the ladder, then like that capacity and that uh, willingness doesn't really exist.
Yeah. And the second question is connected to this one. If we decide that this whole set of what we can say, if this pyramid is there, it exists, and I want to, start something on my own. So I want to ask you the second question. If there is a distinction between DIY culture versus the high budget gigs, do low cost artsy DIY style events often end up being one sided or artist unfriendly, while expensive ticketed gigs become status symbols, and are influencers contributing to this divide?
So, I mean, I think it depends. I think occasionally, but it's relatively rare, you do have an exploitative angle where people are trying to pass off uh, gigs with brand sponsorship with a decent amount of financial capital as DIY gigs in order to try and get artists to accept lower costs or like lower fees or, you know, not give them the stuff that they would require or deserve. But if you're talking about, say, events like gigs and all, usually if it's a DIY event, then it's upfront and clear with the artist that we are sharing these risks. This is the way we're going to share profits. And so it's not like somebody is like you're not doing it for the exposure because you already have the more money places offering you gigs for exposure if you're
Hmm.
going to do it for
Hmm.
free. It's
That's
it's about
interesting.
building that culture together. So okay, these are the
Right.
sort of like for example, I my friend Rana who runs this agency called Reproduce.
Okay.
He and I started, and he mostly runs it, but I also help. Still, this thing called Reproduce Listening Room,
Okay.
which is these like DIY sessions where we would like they would not happen at venues. They would happen at like other spaces, art galleries. We just did one yesterday
Okay.
also. Art galleries, abandoned buildings, like buildings that are under renovation or industrial,
Oh,
like old factories that are now
right.
uh, trading spaces. And so
Hmm.
that's a very clear model, which is we will take care of the organization, we will get the equipment, you are bringing in your talent. We work it together. Uh, Very transparent that up till say a certain amount of uh, tickets, we won't take any money. We will just cover the production, and whatever gets left over is split between the artists. And if we reach a certain number of tickets, then we also take a small cut. So everyone knows that this is something that we are not doing as a profit-making initiative. The finances are all transparent. There are no sponsors. So you
Okay.
don't have like, so it is, everyone is sort of equal in that equation, really. Everyone is
Right.
contributing with clear right. And in that DIY space, I don't consider that exploitative. I think everyone is coming in with an understanding of what they're doing.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And so, like that is how culture is built. Somebody has to take some sort of risks. So, for example, if nobody makes the money, we take the financial risk for
Yeah.
like whatever for the equipment and gear is there. That's one
Hmm.
model of DIY, one type of DIY model. That's on a smaller scale. You have Control All Delete, which is a music festival that my friends organize, and that's like a relatively bigger scale, but it's also crowdfunded. And
Hmm.
so, you know, so it's really about like how much trust there is between the people organizing the event or the people running the independent label or the people doing other sorts of DIY stuff. The trust
Hmm.
between them and the artists and how transparent you are with what you're trying to do, what your capabilities are, what your profits are, like what your motives are for putting something like this. And generally, any successful sort of DIY space or event that runs for a while has to be honest and transparent because you don't have a lot of the other advantages that like say an antisocial might have, or a Blue Frog used to have, or now Anita Mukesh Ambani Cultural Center, that space has, which is lots of capital, lots of connections. Your capital is really the sort of creative capital, and your willingness, artist's willingness to work with you, and your willingness to be honest with the artist. So in that sense, I don't think DIY shows are one-sided or exploitative. Uh, I do think that like there is a problem of like expensive. Uh, there is a problem of access for the audience for a lot of
Hmm.
shows.
Right.
Uh, because unfortunately we lack a lot of the sort of community spaces, all
Hmm.
ages venues. Like so, if you look at Europe or the UK, you do have the clubs where you have to pay for expensive beer, pay for entry, and you're about 21. But you also have lots of other alternative spaces. So if you either your audience is too young or your audience is too broke,
Hmm.
or you're not, or you're still like a upcoming artist that doesn't have the audience, it is much easier. You have much more opportunities to put up shows in alternative spaces where you don't have to
Okay.
sell beer to make a profit, and you don't
Right.
have to charge an incredible amount of money to make that happen. That sort of
Yeah.
support, like community halls, that sort of thing doesn't exist here. So our live scene is very focused on bars and pubs,
Yeah.
and generally
It's like,
expensive bars and pubs. So
yeah.
that is a filtering process where
Yeah, it's more like pay for play.
for play doesn't is not that big, although it still exists. Back in the day, it used to be even
Yeah,
bigger, the pay to play, where
yeah.
they
Not in
wouldn't
cash,
ask you
but
for
in
money,
time.
but essentially, yeah, you
Yeah,
were losing money out of your pocket to go and play a show just because you wanted to play, because that's
yeah.
when options were even fewer. Now it's more the artist is paying, like the audience is paying. But the problem with having a really expensive entry fee and then really expensive alcohol at the venue, really expensive food at the venue, problem with having so many shows at these expensive clubs that cater to say like the 5 or 10% of the population, because that's the only percentage that can afford it, is that then they also want to have a good time. And also, like, if bar sales are what are subsidizing your concerts, then you will automatically gravitate to and push the sort of music which attracts an audience that's willing to drop 2, 3 thousand rupees at a bar.
Hmm.
And but also you want music like so basically that economic dynamic then basically decides what sort of music
Okay,
gets
then
supported,
bar
what sort
is,
of music gets
yeah,
programmed. So the bar sales becomes a nightlife
right.
industry rather than a
Yeah,
music industry.
that's the payment in the kind I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Not in cash, but you are definitely promising some return, which is not intangible. Because mainly the art used to be intangible returns you get, not the tangible returns, but now there are tangible returns, and all of that is necessary. I can understand, and
Yeah.
I completely get the alternative model that you suggested and you guys are working on. That's commendable, definitely. But what I want to get to is, are influencers also contributing to this divide?
I mean, I don't know if
uh,
influences. I don't know if there's a divide
hmm,
exactly as such. It's all on a spectrum,
yeah, 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 yeah.
and a lot of it is like ethical decisions, creative decisions. Do I
Hmm,
want to
hmm,
make music that I know will be
yeah.
popular, or do I want to make the music that I want to make and then accept that it
Hmm,
might not be popular, I might not make money off of it, I might have to have a day job and do
hmm,
this on the side. Those are, I don't think there's necessarily a correct like decision, and I don't think necessarily it's either or. Usually, it's on the spectrum of how much of a compromise you want to make, how much of uh, like how where you balance these different imperatives of accessibility, how to make money out of it, of creative expression, and how much you want to be authentic and unfiltered in your creative expression. And then, of course, obviously, if you want to play music for people, you want people to have fun. And so it's not necessarily just selling out for making money. It's also like you want people to enjoy your music. So you will lean into the stuff that people enjoy more, right? So it's like a very complicated sort of multiple different imperatives pushing you in different directions. It's all about how you, where you find your balance as an artist or a creator. Influencers, I don't think influencers are the problem. The problem is the attention economy and the fact that so much of music discovery, so much of how we think about stuff, so much of what we even consume is now decided by social media and its algorithms. And that's what makes influencers, say, more important now than they ever were, because influencers become mediators. If you can get an influencer to
Yes.
post about your show or put up a video from your show, suddenly
Right.
there's a whole new audience that opens up. which was a
Hmm.
task that earlier would happen through music reviews or through
Okay.
like like a newspaper would publish it or an NDTV would
Yes.
do like a 30-second segment on the festival that's
Yes.
happening,
Or
and
there
suddenly
will
there's
be
a
a
whole
scroll.
bunch of
Yeah.
yeah, and there's a whole bunch of people who would never have heard about your show suddenly hear about it. So Instagram
Right.
influencers are filling that same sort of gap. But the bigger
Okay.
problem is that earlier you had multiple avenues, and now social media has become the decider. Like, so if you
Hmm.
talk about Liz Pelly, who's this American journalist, has written a book called Mood Machine about
Okay.
Spotify, which came
Okay.
out in January. And what she
Okay.
talks about is the discovery funnel, which is
Acha.
like the top of the funnel is where all the music goes in, and
Okay.
then the bottom of the funnel is the music that most people end up listening to.
Right.
And so earlier there used to be multiple different funnels. If you wanted to listen to
Hmm.
independent music, you wouldn't go to the same place. You had different independent record stores which are more focused on that. And if you want
Okay.
mainstream music, you go to like I'm talking about America, but you go to an HMV. Or over here, you'd go to a Planet M because it had access to international music. If you wanted only Bollywood music, you would go to a different type of music store,
Yeah.
right? Now
Hmm.
that funnel has now all of these different sort of things have become part of one funnel, which is social
Yeah.
media and streaming.
Okay.
And so at the top of that funnel is TikTok. If your
Right.
song works for 15 seconds, that hook
Okay.
works on TikTok, then people
Right.
will listen to it. And then you get to Spotify, and does it work for streaming? Then you put it on playlists. So basically, there's what she describes as the flattening of music culture, where
Hmm.
different types of music scenes, different types of artists, with very different intentions and very different goals, now all have to compete in that same mechanism, that same funnel. They have to compete with the big labels. There's no space for having independent infrastructure for music distribution and for music consumption that is more suited for different scenes or different ways of thinking about music. And when
Yeah.
that happens, it's always the ones with the biggest financial capital and the biggest access and the biggest ability to consolidate power and deploy power,
Hmm.
which is basically
Hmm.
major labels and those affiliated with it. They will always win on
Interesting.
that sort of
Interesting.
field. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. I get it how influences are placed in all of this
Yeah,
and how roles are replaced,
yeah.
in today's age. And the book you referred, the funnel and everything about it, I kind of resonate with this, but for now, I'll move to the third question,
Yeah,
and I'll definitely recommend this book to be
yes.
read because yeah, it offers a new perspective, and
It's a very interesting book.
yeah,
It's
yes,
about like what streaming has done to
mm,
both music production and music consumption, how it's changed
right,
it.
right. So I'll go on to the third question.
Yeah.
This is so I'll ask, if is poor documentation a root problem in Indian music and archiving? What do you make of the frequent closure and proprietary artist management firms, indie labels, or event-based initiatives? So this is more about how we have come so far and what could have we missed on something, and is archiving done properly, and what are the ways in which you see it as a music journalist?
So I'll start with the second part first. So I think globally, if you're running an independent sort of label, venue, even artist management firms, but those are little more resilient. They're not they do need to make a profit to run, but they're not profit oriented in the sense profit is not like the main thing or the only motive. Profit is what needed to keep things running to make sure that you can earn a salary and not starve. But the main goal is to promote the type of cultural output, the type of community, the type of the social organizing, and uh, basically the main target for doing these sort of things is to create and promote the sort of culture that you want. And so in that case, you're obviously going to, and you also obviously you're doing it independently because you don't have massive amounts of funding and money. So these are always going to be precarious businesses and precarious sort of uh, organizations and entities. And so even internationally, there's always this constant churn. Labels will come, they will have maybe a 5 6 year period where they might even change the face of the sort of music industry, and then they recede. Either they break up or they recede from importance and become like just like you look at Sub Pop, which gave us grunge and Nirvana and this massive explosion. It's still around, but it's nowhere near as influential as it used to be, and nowhere near as big. And Sub Pop is one of the bigger, more profitable indie labels. You look at SST Records, which is like a punk label from the 1980s, ran for a few years, maybe close to a decade, put out some of the most influential American punk records of the 80s, and then went bust. A lot of the sort of venues from the 60s, 70s, 80s have gone. So that churn of independent artists, independent labels, independent venues is going to happen because it's very rare for a properly indie organization that sticks to that ethos, to the DIY ethos, to be able to survive for too long. But there is always new people coming in. There's always fresh blood. Some of those people will then try a different venture, learning the lessons from the earlier one. So that is not something that I get too worried about. And honestly, if you're starting an indie label, then you should already make peace with the fact that it might not last longer than a few years. Uh, you should go in clear-eyed with that. You try and do
Okay.
as much impact as you can while you're doing it. The
Right.
documentation is the concern. There is like a
Mm-hmm.
serious lack of documentation, which has slowly changed over the last few years. I mean,
Okay.
you've had some attempts to document the sort of rock and independent scenes of the 90s and 2000s. Uh, uh, Arjun S. Ravi and Red Bull did an interesting series a few years ago talking about that, like trying to document the certain section of the Indian rock scene. You have like documentaries like more recently Back Then, which is a documentary that's done a lot of rounds of festivals, which is I think more Bombay focused and for which I was interviewed, full disclosure, but which is focused on the Bombay scene, rock, metal, and then a little bit of the early hip hop scene from the 90s and 2000s. But we don't have the level of documentation from lots of books, a lot of the sort of art, the album art, a lot of these things was never online. It was either before the internet existed or some of the platforms that it was hosted on, like RSJ forums and GigPads, all went down and don't exist anymore. And then you don't have like books and you don't have like the sort of general documentation in terms of both press and like in terms of journalism and in terms of more long form literary or video or audio documentation of the stuff that you would get for independent scenes outside, even though a lot of those bands are still quite have been still quite influential. So that is a piece of history that I mean I think we should really try and capture now because now everyone's still 40, 50, 60, like the oldest might be in their 60s, but as you get further and further away from when that stuff was happening, uh, you lose these stories, and these stories are very important, not just for what they are, but also because they represent the idea that like it's not just like you're not alone into 2025 trying to figure out how to make this really weird new music that you really like, how to make it into a career or how to make it into a sustainable scene. Other people have been doing the same thing since the 50s, 60s, 70s, in fact, right? And that history exists. It's also served as a source of inspiration, a source of lessons for what works, what doesn't work, for how people have creatively
Yeah.
dealt with like this
Hmm.
sort of stuff, how people have creatively dealt with censorship, which is an issue that I think will become increasingly important in India going forward. So you know, if you want to create independent culture, you should know how people have tried to do these things before and both succeeded and
Yeah.
failed. And so
Yeah.
if you don't have that documentation, then you're constantly stuck reinventing the wheel.
Yes. Yes. And in fact, what happens is the one-to-one experiences,
Yeah,
they becomes the oral documentation or oral history becomes, the basis for the
yeah,
artist to
yeah,
get the experiences and learn from that and then go forward. And
yeah,
then again, the cycle, like you mentioned, the cycle of trial and error comes back to the
yeah,
play. And that is why I think, as some universities are like, this is not what I want to focus on in
yeah,
this interview, but some universities or the music departments in the city, in the country like India, they can dwell on this and there could be a larger picture coming up. because what happens is the traditional practices are very well documented, but
Yeah,
the artists who have chosen the independent practices, what they like, despite not the background they have come from,
yeah,
but the independent practices from the experiences from they have come across, those
yeah,
independent practices have to be somewhere. YouTube tried to do that, and
yeah,
it sort of broke that, the divide. Again, the divide word here is not literal divide, but the the separation what I'm talking
yeah,
about. And those universities can really do this, and it can be a really good cultural exercise, and it can really create one more cultural space, which is maybe it is present, it is definitely present in the art galleries and everywhere else, but it can be accessible to people like me.
yeah.
So yeah,
Like a
that's
part,
what.
I think part of the reason, say,
Yeah.
uh, the academy, like universities, and all don't focus on it too much is because for a while it was like it was Western rather than Indian influenced music. It's a small, largely elite crowd, right? But that has changed, especially with hip hop. It is now a much bigger, much wider, much deeper
Yeah.
sort of independent
Yes, it
music
is.
is
It
now
is.
spread
Yes.
across different parts of society. So I think with that, you will have more and more because you will have lots of people growing up who grew up in these scenes, then go to university and then do their master's thesis or their PhDs and focus on this. So with hip hop, you're already seeing that you have, I think, Yatin English in Mumbai University, who used to at least, I don't know if he still does, taught a course on hip hop and is like an academic who's written about Mumbai hip hop. And you'll see more and more of this sort of stuff happening. So I'm hopeful for the future, especially of the stuff that's happening now and for the last 5, 10 years, that will be much better documented than the scenes that I grew up with. And I think there is some interest in documenting those scenes better as well, which is why you have, this, for example, the Back Then documentary that I mentioned, which is from the last 2, 3 years, and that's also gained a lot of attention. So I think on documentation front, things are looking a lot brighter than they were even say 5 years ago.
Right. So I'll move on to my next question.
Yeah.
This question is again, it has some sort of answer in what we have already discussed. But here I see music as a culture setter. And I want to ask, do you believe music largely shapes culture or vice versa? How does Western music fit into Indian cultural transformation? And are there any specific genres that you believe have shifted the cultural fabric more significantly than others? So it's mainly what I see music, not only as music, but the culture setter. What do you think about it?
So I mean, music and culture is like music is part of culture. So I don't know if you can really decide whether music influences culture or culture influences music. They're all music is just one subset of sort of the different sort of practices, ways of relating with each other, and like that come together to form culture. And like I think, I mean, I understand the Indian or Western dichotomy when you're talking about styles and where you're drawing your inspiration from. But even if it's rock and roll being made by a Bombay band of kids who grew up in Bombay, it's still, to me, it is still Indian music because it is being made by Indians. So, like, I mean, uh, there are steps of back when rock bands started, they were just trying to ape what Western bands were doing and try and recreate that. But now they are taking that as influence, but then you also put in your lived experience, the sounds that you grew up with, the sounds around you. And so a lot of rock, like even if like the instrumentation and the composition is global in the sense that you it doesn't necessarily have a sitar in it or a tabla in it to signify that it's Indian. The lyrics, the sort of thought process, the person whose expression it is the product of living and growing up in India. So I don't like outside of genre classification and a more general sort of this thing. I don't subscribe to this dichotomy that like if something has come from the West, that it can't be Indian as well.
Right.
So in that sense, like what we look at as Western music comes with its own sort of, it does come with its own sort of implicit cultural ideas, right? It tends to be more
Okay.
individualistic. Uh,
Yeah.
like if you're into rock, then rock has a certain, especially punk rock and more. underground forms of rock. If you're doing say punk rock or alternative underground music, then there is an anti-establishment ethos built into it, a sort of anti-capitalist idea that kind of is built into that scene. So you're more suspicious of selling out. If you're into hip hop, there is rebellion and anti-establishment, but it's not necessarily as anti-consumerist. It's not as wary of you know of talking about success or thinking of success in monetary and financial terms or in terms of sales. So that is true, but that is true of every genre or every style within whether it's Indian or Western, because each music, each this thing has its own cultural and political context within which it emerged, and then everyone adapts. So if you look at hip hop emerged from a specific context within the inner cities of America. But you look at Germany, they made it their own thing. You look at Iraq and Palestine, they have adopted hip hop for their own purposes. And you look at it happening here, it's the same thing. And I think the last part of your question was, is there a particular genre that's really impacted Indian culture? I think that it's quite obviously hip hop.
Right, right. So, so there are more like these cultural shifts are connected to the India's cultural transformation. Are Do you see that connection, or do you see that music as a culture is a separate topic altogether, or maybe it's on the backbench and the India's cultural transformation goes separately ahead? What do
No, I
you
think that
see?
they're obviously very interlinked. So you can't talk about India's cultural transformation because it's too big a country and you're talking
Right,
about too many different things. But generally, in terms of like music is both a driver of and a reflector of sort of cultural trends that are happening. And that is also happening in response to or like as part of the broader transformations that are technological, economic, political. So,
right, right,
like it's very hard to disentangle them and have a cause and effect or say this is a separate silo, this is a separate silo. It's all happening at the same time and being acted on by all of these
hmm,
different influences at the same time. So,
right,
for example, so much of hip hop's rise is about uh, Reliance bringing in cheap smartphones and the explosion of cheap data.
hmm,
Right? The Indian hip hop would not have exploded so much, would not have reached the sort of audience without uh, people having cheap data. And also, like the people sitting in Delhi and Bombay who are the gatekeeping the music industry would not have known that so many people are interested in this sort of listening to this music if you didn't have like suddenly instead of the say 100 million or 50 million people who had access to broadband who were
right,
largely the elite. Suddenly you had
yeah,
kids in Vashi or kids even in like a village in Gujarat,
yeah,
and you could see, oh, they're actually liking this. They're sharing this on back in the day,
hmm,
Bluetooth and WhatsApp and stuff. You can track that they have an interest in this music. Oh, this actually has an audience. So then put some money behind Mere Kali Mein and see how it goes. So like in that sense, like culture is impacted by and then has an impact on politics, technology, the economics, and vice versa. I do think
right,
that music is an integral part of this transformation. It is not something that's separate. It's not something that you
hmm,
can say is in the background. You look at
right,
even uh, like if you look at elections, every time election happens, every party will jump on whatever trending music is there, and they want like they will do some traditional music to appeal to their older, more traditional voters. But every party will also try and create a rap song or a dance song, whatever is the youth are listening to, because they are also trying to tap into that cultural state. So you can't say like so. Just an example to show that music is very essential to the way we think of our identities, think of our cultures, and the way we transmit ideas to each other.
right. So I'll shorten my next question because most of the things are answered already. So I'll just ask you, if the Indian market is finally opening up for the kind of mobility that we are looking at, what do you see following in the next couple of years, and what sort of precautions or what sort of measures do you want to suggest to artists, given your experience, and could it be in a more collated format? Should there be more? ways of engaging into things. So could you please, guide, or could you tell us that in the next couple of years, this is how the Indian market is going to look like?
So I'm not someone who follows the business of music that closely. And generally also like I feel like there's no one size fits all guide to navigating this space as an artist. Because I mean, like I said earlier, there's so many different reasons people do art. There's so many different end goals and motives that people have. There's so many different things that people want to get out of it, and there will be a different path for everyone. What I will say broadly is, I think yes, because of technology, because of rising in disposable income, and also specifically post-COVID, I think there has been a much more. There's been an increase in interest in just live experiences, going out to catch music live, going out to watch comedy stuff. Like so, if you look at the numbers, there has been a big explosion of interest and also money coming into the live event space. All of that shows that yes, I think the space for interesting and different music and the space for musical experimentation and the space for music from different parts of the country, both geographically and demographically, is increasing. Uh,
Right,
and I
right.
think there hasn't been a better time to be an independent
Hmm.
musician than now. But at the same
Yeah.
time, what is missing and what I hope to see more of is like more of the infrastructure required.
Hmm.
More
Hmm.
venues, more independent artist-focused labels and management companies, and more risk taking from even the bigger companies. Creative risk
Right.
taking, trying to set trends rather than follow them, trying to find the sound of tomorrow or maybe even day after rather than trying to capitalize only on the sound of now.
Hmm. Hmm.
That is what I feel is missing from the industry still, and that will help the Indian industry become like much stronger both domestically and globally. So instead of one Hanuman kind, we should at this point have like 15. The
Right.
reason we don't is because Hanuman kind had to make it by himself before getting signed to Universal.
Hmm.
Instead of Universal finding a Hanuman kind when he was still a diamond in the rough and like figuring out how to get him to break internationally.
Right.
So
Right.
basically, yeah, more if our major labels and our uh, industries and the general stakeholders in the music industry are more open to creative risk and to sort of long-term investment in artists and scenes, then I
Hmm.
think things will look even brighter.
Yeah. I'm so thankful to have this conversation, and I truly want to thank you for taking out your time. And the way in which this conversation has flowed gave me a slight background to the music industry as well as what is going to be followed and what's happening today. So, in fact, there could be more questions, and we can if definitely get on one more podcast if the things follow suit.
Sounds
And
good.
yeah, I'll definitely be willing to talk to you further about this. And I want to thank you again for coming to this podcast. Thank you so much, Bun.
Of course, it's been a pleasure talking
Yeah,
to you. Thank you so much for having me on.
thank you, man.